It was the last night of the year, a time when revelers filled the streets with laughter, and the skies were painted with the vibrant colors of fireworks. Yet, in the small, forgotten town of Darnwich, the air carried an unshakable weight of foreboding. The townsfolk celebrated with an almost desperate fervor, their faces masks of cheer concealing a collective fear they dared not name. Arthur Blackwood, a reclusive antiquarian, had come to Darnwich on a whim. The isolated village, with its crumbling stone buildings and labyrinthine streets, appealed to his insatiable curiosity for all things ancient and obscure. That New Year's Eve, as others gathered in the central square for the countdown, Arthur found himself wandering alone, drawn by an inexplicable pull toward the outskirts of town. There, he discovered a peculiar sight, an abandoned mansion, its silhouette a jagged black scar against the moonlit sky. The house, known locally as the Marston Manor, was shunned by the villagers, its windows darkened and its gates wrapped in chains. Yet, despite its decrepitude, Arthur felt an unholy allure emanating from it, a beckoning he could neither explain nor resist. The gates creaked open at his touch, though the rusted chains remained unbroken. Arthur stepped inside, his lantern casting long, wavering shadows across the overgrown garden. The front door swung inward with a sound like a dying breath, revealing a grand but decayed interior. Dust hung thick in the air, and the faint smell of mildew was undercut by something far fouler, an acrid scent that stung his nostrils and churned his stomach. On the walls were faded murals, depictions of jubilant gatherings and masked figures dancing beneath a darkened sky. Yet, as Arthur's lantern illuminated more of the room, he realized the scenes were not of revelry but of carnage. The masked figures carried grotesque implements, and the joyous faces were twisted in expressions of terror. Beneath the frescoes, an inscription ran the length of the wall in a language he could not recognize, but that seemed to shift and writhe under his gaze. Driven by a compulsion he could not suppress, Arthur descended deeper into the house. The air grew colder, the oppressive silence broken only by the distant, rhythmic sound of something heavy being dragged across the floor. He followed the noise to a grand ballroom, its vaulted ceiling obscured by darkness. Here, a figure stood at the center of the room, draped in tattered robes, and wearing a mask of bone-white porcelain. The mask's features were eerily blank, save for the hollow sockets where eyes should have been. "Welcome," the figure intoned, its voice a hollow whisper that seemed to reverberate within Arthur's skull. "You've come to witness the turning." Before Arthur could respond, the room erupted with movement. Shadows peeled away from the walls, forming into vaguely human shapes that danced and writhed to a soundless melody. The murals on the walls bled, the painted figures spilling forth into the room, as if the very fabric of reality had begun to unravel. Arthur's lantern flickered and died, leaving him in near total darkness save for the faint, sickly glow emanating from the masked figure. The figure raised an arm, and the shadows converged upon Arthur, their touch freezing and insubstantial. In his mind, he heard their whispers, fragments of madness, invocations of an ancient and malevolent entity whose name could not be spoken by mortal tongues. He struggled to flee, but his limbs felt leaden, his will drained by the oppressive presence that filled the room. "The new year brings renewal," the figure said, its voice rising to a terrible crescendo. "But for us, it brings the return." The last thing Arthur saw was the mask of porcelain descending toward him, its empty sockets now glowing with an otherworldly light. Then, the world dissolved into darkness. The next morning, the townsfolk of Darnwich found the Marston Manor as it had always been, chained, silent, and shrouded in decay. But in the central square, amidst the remnants of their celebration, they discovered a single artifact, a porcelain mask, its surface smeared with fresh blood and its empty sockets staring blindly into the dawn of a new year.